Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to the World Government Summit. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am Senior International Correspondent and Anchor for CNBC. Today we're going to be talking about our connected future, a deeper look at the forces fragmenting our world, and as we all know, there are many. I'm very pleased to welcome my distinguished panelists, Her Excellency Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the IMF, His Excellency Abdullah Al-Mari, the Minister of Economy here in the UAE, and His Excellency Ghassan Salame, Founding Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs and Professor of International Relations. It's lovely to have you all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just to kick things off, I'd like to get a sense from our panelists of what they see as the greatest challenge today to global growth.
Keeping the world together. What we face is forces of fragmentation, as you indicated, that are pulling us apart. We have done analysis at the IMF. What is the cost of this fragmentation? And it is quite scary, because if we pull apart and we form blocks within which we trade, it can cost us anywhere between losing 0.2% of GDP, minor, manageable, all the way to losing 7% of GDP. Just to give you a sense what 7% of GDP means, it is wiping out Germany and Japan from the world economy. So if we want to have the well-being of our people protected, we better figure out how to keep the cost of more security of supplies down to the lower end, to the 0.2% end.
Your Excellency.
Well, I would like to add to that as well on the aspects of, we will see more of the fragmentation, but more reduced access to markets. We'll see a lot of countries putting national priorities, building aspects on the policies of industrial policies, and these are things that we see more on fragmentations globally. These issues, these challenges will really take away 3 decades of a globalized world, of a seamless trade, of investments flow that will come together. So seeing that kind of this is one of the greatest challenges that we are looking at the moment in a fragmented world.
Your Excellency.
Well, I think that we need to see the thing both ways. Geoeconomics is affected by geopolitical fragmenting forces. Mm-hmm. There has been, in the past 20 years, a trivialization of the use of force by great powers. There is a big tension now over Africa again among the great powers. There is a lot of sanctions based on political reasons that are impediments to trade. All this is real, but on the other hand, it works both ways. Some bad economic politics are creating tensions in many countries. Privatization, as it took place in many countries, has created a lot of frustration in these societies. And very often, what we have seen in the past 20 years, liberalization led to the creation of kleptocratic networks in many countries that have taken the state hostage. So it is not that economy is a nice thing, sleeping beauty, and politics comes and disturbs the whole thing. It works both ways. And that's why fragmentation is dialectical. There are bad economic policies that lead to tension and frustration, and there are a number of geopolitical factors that lead to a slowing down of FDI, a smaller growth in trade, etc.
To your point, Your Excellency, I think the next question would have to be, speaking of the post-Soviet breakup, and as you say, the liberal policies that didn't necessarily benefit those in former Soviet nations. Ukraine, Managing Director, what is the IMF's role with Ukraine today, and what are you prepared to give?
We have been engaged with Ukraine way before the war started. We have deep relations with the economic bloc of the Ukrainian government, and we have done quite a lot in the past to know each other. That came to be very helpful because the moment the war started on February 24th, virtually that very day, the Central Bank of Ukraine and Ministry of Finance turned to us and said, now what? And we have in real time provided advice how to run a war economy. We have since financed 2 emergency finance packages totaling about $2.7 billion, and we have created an account at the IMF where those who want to help Ukraine can direct funding, so there would be an oversight from the IMF of how the money is then used. Now we have a very important program, 4 months, in which we define what are the key policy actions that need to be taken to keep inflation under control. It is high, it got to 25%, but in many war countries, inflation would run in the hundreds of percents, not in that level, and how to continue to provide critical services, pensions to be paid, salaries of teachers and doctors to be paid, the economy to function. This has proven to be quite successful. I am full of admiration of the Ukrainian authorities. We hold our meetings virtually. Very often we would hear the sirens and then the meeting would be interrupted just for a couple of seconds if people need to move to a safer direction, and we would continue to work on. My brother is married to a Ukrainian. He found himself in Kharkiv when the war started. He was there until June. And what I can tell you is that his mother-in-law's pension was paid on time, and all the social services function. And I'll share with you an interesting anecdote that shows how people get united at the time of war. The tradition in Ukraine is in the month of May for flowers to be planted and cities to be cleaned. So May last year, flowers were planted, and the city of Kharkiv, that was bombed multiple times a day, was clean. So that gives me a great sense of confidence. We now work on a program for Ukraine. Just to give you a sense of needs, Ukraine needs somewhere around 40 to $48 billion this year as external financial support for the country to function. It will be helped by the European Union, by the US, by others, but we, as an institution with long-standing relations with Ukraine, strongly believe we have to play also our stabilizing role by being there for the Ukrainian economy and the Ukrainian people.
But you know, prior to the war, this was one of the most corrupt nations in the world. And frankly, there are 2 questions there. One, does the war help or hurt their efforts to become a more liberalized democracy in part of Europe? And at the same point, a lot of folks globally are worried about the amount of money that is going to be poured into Ukraine and where it's going to end up.
It is true that Ukraine had very serious problems with corruption, and one of the reasons for the IMF to have consecutive programs with Ukraine was to work on creating the institutions that fight corruption and creating the accountability mechanisms that reduce the probability of money being stolen. We found when the war started a remarkable mobilization. The nation came together in a way that surprised us. It may have surprised some of the people in Ukraine. And it became actually easier to press for more attention to the standing of the Ukrainian nation. And the embracement of fight against corruption, to my delight, is more today than it was before the war. Why? There is one guiding light for Ukraine, and it is the fact that the war has positioned the country surprisingly better to be a candidate to join the European Union. And that objective to become part of the European family and to enjoy all the support that would come with it plays a very major role of how people in Ukraine think about the future of their country. Is the job done? No. As you know, recently there was a discovery of corrupt practices, and action has been taken. And it would take more efforts and more commitment, and this is why I actually look positively to the engagement of the fund. We can contribute by building the accountability mechanisms further. And one thing that is also very interesting is people in Ukraine, their tolerance for corruption has gone down dramatically. When you're in a war, when the bombs are falling, you don't take lightly if public money that is there to restore electricity, heat, and water is being stolen. So pressure within the society on keep your hands out of the honey jar, this pressure is much stronger today.
Minister Al-Marri, just to get your sense of how we sit in this part of the world today. Obviously, Dubai, the UAE, is an international trading and logistics hub with an international airline, with folks coming here from all over the world. When you take a step back and think about the UAE's role going forward, there has been some discomfort in Washington and other Western capitals with the fact that the greatest foreign direct investor in this country, for example, is China, that half of China's oil comes from this part of the world. How do you view the UAE's role today?
So let's take a step back, like you said, and let's talk about not just the UAE, let's talk about the economy in the last couple of years. Let's say last 7 years. The economy is suffering. We've seen the economy slow growth in the last 7 years. We've seen the pandemic hits us and wiped out most of the economy's growth as well in these slower years. We've seen oil prices going up and down. I don't know, I never imagined in my lifespan to see oil barrels sold minus $0. We've seen next couple of months of that, the oil prices as well says at $120. We've seen the high inflation rate. We've seen high interest rates. We've seen a geopolitical war. These are economic sufferings that not just the UAE is seeing, the global economy is seeing. I think we need to give an economy a break and really come back and speak how does the UAE manage to recover through the last couple of years and really build a lighthouse just in the region to show how a dynamic government, dynamic visionary leaders really pull down a fast and agile policies to really recombat back the economy. I think the most important part, why is the economy important and the economy has to have a break, is the youth. And the youth in the region, the creation of jobs is the most important part. We have the highest unemployed youth in the region, in the MENA region. It is an aspect for us, when there's economic growth, there's job creation. Now, with technology coming in, there's a lot of reskilling needs to happen, and these are discussions of the summit this week. I think it's important to look at how the UAE is in the MENA region, it's in the hub. It looks as more of an open dialogue with the world, with the policies, respecting the United Nations policies and arrangements, respecting people's sovereignty, government sovereignty, and I think that's the aspect where the UAE really plays a role of a neutrality in ways that really addresses these challenges. But I think bottom line is give the economy a break. Let's talk. Let's have dialogue. Let's come back to the multilaterals and really have a dialogue of this fragmentation, because we enjoyed 3 decades of seamless trade, seamless globalization, access to market, and we woke up one day and there's this kind of multipolar world. What's going to happen next? I think it's an aspect of really coming together. We really need to invest into the multilaterals, put our energy to really have this dialogue and really make it successful. Let's take a step back as well. When did the multilateral was created? When there was risk and chaos, when there was war. And I think we're going to have risk and chaos every 6 months. Multilateral need to be much stronger, and we need to really believe in that kind of aspect and really bring them together.
I could not agree more. I want to say two things. One, that these 3 decades with peace dividend meant that the world economy tripled. Who benefited the most? Emerging markets, developing economies. They quadrupled at that time. But rich countries also benefited. They doubled. We got 1.3 billion people lifted out of poverty. If we don't resist the forces of fragmentation, and if we don't pave the way for pragmatic collaboration, we would be all poorer and the world would be less safe. And my second point is to recognize that we lost, because of Russia's war in Ukraine, a very precious peace dividend. The fact that military spending around the world was lower. Now, for understandable reasons, now many nations say, hey, defense has to be funded because we cannot take peace for granted anymore. This peace dividend is gone. What does it mean? Less money domestically for education, for healthcare, for infrastructure, less money to support the poor world. And I would scream from the top of a mountain, hey, wake up, we need each other. And therefore, we have to figure out how we work together in a world that is multipolar. We can do it. We can do it. And I want to see the audience. Do you agree? Can we stay together as a world? Yes, we can.
Your Excellency, I'll weigh in on this one because there is the geoeconomic question, as you say, and what is the most worrying thing? Are we talking about the tension between the US and China? Are we talking about Putin's war in Ukraine? Or the dissatisfaction with so many in the world over energy prices?
I believe that you had, since the end of the Cold War, 2 completely different periods. We tend to put them together. You have from 1990 to around 2007, a period of great hope. In fact, FDI was increasing at a very rapid, the place of trade in the global GDP was increasing very rapidly. A lot of countries were converging around the same market economy. After 2007, you had a number of signals we didn't see clearly. First, you had the financial crisis, and its effects are still there. Second, you had something else. You had the fact that great powers started to be not only in a state of tension among themselves, but also starting using force. The US in Iraq, Russia in Georgia, and later in Ukraine in 2014. You had also something else, a slowdown of the democratization process across the world. The number of democracies started decrease instead of increasing as it was before. So you had a number of signals, and we entered a new period. So if you have like 30, 40 years since the end of the Cold War, you need to divide it into 2. From 1990 to 2007, and from 2007 until now, where contradictory forces, economic and geopolitical, are at play. And they are worrying. And if you need the epitome, fragmented part of the word, it would be MENA. MENA is entirely fragmented, and you could see it clearly because if you ask me what's happening in MENA, my answer would be depending where you look at. You have at least 3 dynamics that have nothing or very little to do with each other. And that's why this part of the world absolutely need a new script for it to operate as an entity and not only as a department in the IMF or in State Department or in Quai d'Orsay. It needs a new script to operate as an integrated region. Now it is not. You have at least 3 different dynamics. One in the GCC, we talked about, with more national independence that are making some capitals nervous across the world, but they need to adjust to it, but which is adding competition within the GCC. And this also we need to underline. And you have the Levant. The Levant in a state of complete turmoil. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, nothing is working there. And there is an economic crisis in Jordan, and the Palestinian issue is still not far from being solved. And then if you go into North Africa, you have a completely different thing. You have an Algerian-Moroccan relation that is at a high level of tension, like you have not seen in 30 years. You have Libya, which is not solved as a problem. Egypt, where you have very serious economic concerns. And Sudan, where a new formula for cooperation between the military and civilian is still to be found and implemented. Therefore, MENA is the typical fragmented region, and the typical region that badly needs a new script in order to make it an integrated entity, which is far from being the case right now. Thank you.
Minister Al-Marri, should the UAE be the author of that script?
Well, the UAE is not an advocate of fragmentation, but we have a lot of opportunity that comes out of fragmentation. I don't want to be sounded as a very advocate of it, but we are in the heart of the MENA region. We have a strong financial hubs. Our banks is one of the most liquid, very strong balance sheets, and they operate on all systems. We have a strong financial system that applies to the East and West at the moment. And we've seen an openness to policies globally. Now, we do not look at it as an opportunity, but we look at it from an adaptability and agility part, where we need to adapt. We are on the eye of the storm at the moment, where there's a lot of risks and challenges and tensions happening around us. But we need to adapt very quickly and very fast, and the UAE really plays that role in showing that these policies need to be looked at in a way where there is opportunity as well, where we find this kind of fragmentation happening, but we need to come back, and multilateral is very important to come back to.
Yeah. Managing Director, I mean, when you think about this a bit more broadly, obviously when we speak in this part of the world, we're talking about the MENA region as well, zeroing in on what's happening in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Syria, and certainly with the massive disruption that the earthquakes have made in Turkey. To your mind, how difficult is 2023 going to be?
The world economy is still in a very difficult place. Global growth is slowing down in 2023, but it may be a turning point. Why? Because we see inflation finally trimming down in quite a number of countries, headline inflation for sure, core inflation a bit slower to go down, but the chance of finally getting on top of the problem of cost of living being a major disruptor for millions and millions of people, we see light in the end of this tunnel. And global growth is bottoming out. What we are very concerned is, one, the unexpected. What COVID and the war taught us is we live in a more shock-prone world. What the earthquake in Turkey and Syria taught us, think of the unthinkable. And we all have to change our mindset to be much more agile and much more oriented towards building resilience at all levels so we can handle these shocks better. And when you think about resilience, what does it mean? Well, first, resilient people, educated, healthy, with a good social protection when something happens, to rely on it. Second, resilient society, not just economy, not just banking sector, but society where the fabric is strong, that everyone has a sense that access to opportunities are for everybody, and there is a fairer distribution of these opportunities, and a resilient planet. UAE is going to host COP28. may we have focus on action, because we are not where we should be in keeping, being good stewards of our planet for our children. So this change in mindset in 23, if we succeed to make that, the year would be a turning point. And last but not least, using opportunities to build bridges rather than blow them up. Here, this is an opportunity, and I want to thank the UAE for bringing us every year to think about a future in which together we are stronger.
Just before we wrap it up, and to your point, Managing Director, are you satisfied with the West's response to Russia?
The way the world managed to stay together, even if it is a much more pressing issue for Europe than it is for the rest of the world, is quite remarkable. And I think that the West, but not only the West, everyone got some sense of sympathy for a problem that today is Ukraine's problem, but tomorrow can be a problem for many other countries, that you can be invaded by your stronger neighbor. So I think we have seen this resolve in Ukraine for a reason. In Ukraine, people strongly believe they're fighting not just for themselves, they're fighting for the right of every nation to exist and run its own affairs. Yes, I think there has been quite a strong and deliberate response, and rightly so, because how can we live in a world when there is no law and order? If I may, I have done many things in my life, and I learned one very, very important lesson, that for a society to be strong, for a country to be well, there are three things that are necessary: education, infrastructure, and rule of law. If we blow up rule of law internationally, how are we going to keep it domestically? So yes, we have a case in Ukraine that is way beyond Ukraine. It is about how we work and live and face our future if rule of law is destroyed. It is for everyone, everybody's interest to defend it.
Your Excellencies, thank you so much. Thank you, audience.
Thank you.